What's up, guys? Coming to you from my living room once again, doing the little whiteboard class session. Today we are going to be talking about microclimates though. And microclimates are so important. You can have such fluctuation in water or temperature that you can actually have a small area or a restricted space that is going to have a completely different climate than an area right next to it. Microclimate can actually be affected by temperature, elevation, the amount of sunlight it gets, different types of structures, water, and that can be a body of water or the amount of water that it gets, and you can actually grow your own microclimates. Now, microclimates can also be seasonal. I'm going to go through this all and do an example of each. Temperature, okay? So one thing I see a lot in Arizona is we have a lot of block and concrete and unnatural areas. Now what I like to do with concrete, because it gets so hot, is I like to cover that stuff up with vining crops or just vines in general, because that's going to actually insulate that wall and calm down that temperature quite a bit. Now, another thing I see with brick or block is that people will make planters out of them. And in the wintertime, it's actually kind of nice because you can extend your season and grow warmer weather crops. Because if it's a high of 50 and a low of 28, basically those blocks are going to stay warmer longer and radiate that heat at the coldest time. So microclimates aren't good or bad, they just kind of are. Another thing here is elevation, okay? So hot air rises. If you have an area that's sunken, what tends to happen if there's not a lot of wind going through there is that cold air will settle and stay. And excuse me, and your area that's a little bit higher is actually going to be warmer. In a place like the Sonoran Desert, where we really don't have too many freezing temperatures, but our freezing temperatures usually tend to be right around freezing if they are, those few degrees and little changes in elevation can actually be make or break for some of your plants. Sunlight. Now, sunlight's a really big one here. Again, in Arizona specifically, we have a lot of sun. So you can calm your sunlight down by growing your own shade in like a moringa tree or a castor bean tree, and that will kind of limit that sunlight cooling off that area behind it, making a microclimate. You can also encourage sunlight, and people I'll see sometimes will want to do a garden and cut down a tree to make an area have more sun. Now, another thing is structure, okay? Structure is really big. Now, structure can be a lot of people, when they come to me like, oh, I want to do a greenhouse. And a greenhouse is great for about 2 or 3 months of the year in Phoenix specifically. If you were in Flagstaff or Minnesota or someplace else, those can be really helpful. But what we want instead of the greenhouse is actually that structure to hold heat in, but also make a shade structure to kind of limit that heat in the hotter months, because you don't need to create any more heat in July in Phoenix. So limiting that and creating a microclimate by adding some shade cloth or growing some shade trees is really going to create that microclimate that you might be looking for. Water is kind of multiple fold. Water obeys gravity. So if you have a low point on your property or in your garden, that is automatically going to get water. Now, another thing about water is water does hold heat. So when it does get close to freezing, that water is going to take a lot longer to cool down compared to the air, and you are going to have more heat around that body of water. Another thing too is some soil will drain better. There's all types of things to look at. The number one thing I tell people when I go to a new property is observe, take pictures, and when it's really raining hard outside, go outside and see what your property's doing. See where the water is going. See where it's falling off your roof and making mud. All these things are ammunition for you to have a better garden and more success. Another thing, again, growing your own is so important. You can really like a lot of trees won't take our full western sun here in Phoenix specifically. So what you can do is put a shade tree in front of them, a fast-growing shade tree like the moringa, like the castor bean. Both are really heat tolerant. Mulberry is also really good. Figs, pomegranates, all those are really good and will take full sun and create a little bit of shade behind it. You know, and a lot of times microclimates are seasonal. I've got places in my yard specifically where you don't see any sun in the wintertime, but then summertime comes and it's like straight on, and vice versa. So back to observation is that, you know, you've got all these different inputs that can be creating microclimates. They're all very important, and, you know, again, they're not good or bad, they just kind of are. And being able to harness those things is really going to help you. A really good tool for this is this guy right here. And this is just a little temperature gun, and it is going to tell you how much different surfaces are. And I'll tell you, in my yard, on a cold day, a cold morning, I will have fluctuations of over 20 degrees. So that can really, again, make or break your garden. If you guys have any questions about microclimates, drop them in the comments. Have a good one, guys. Keep your heads up.